Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Cremando for YogaUOnline, and I'm super excited to be here today with Julie Gudmestad. If you are a regular consumer of YogaU stuff, you know Julie because she's a frequent contributor. She brings us lots of wonderful programs and webinars and lectures and so on. Julie brings 40 years of experience blending her background as a physical therapist and an Iyengar trained yoga teacher, and she's created her own alignment-based yoga style, which she has taught to hundreds of teachers, first with her Gudmestad yoga in Portland. Is it Portland, Julie?
Portland, Oregon, yep.
Which now I think you've passed it on to the next generation, but you're still a presence there. But she's also, we won't let her leave for very long from our portal. So we see her quite a bit. And she's written for Yoga International, Yoga Journal, lots of other publications. So we're excited to be talking to her today. So Julie, I have a little mission for you. It's a little somewhat personal because I know you share these. I'm going to put you to work today dispelling a couple of my personally most annoying yoga myths.
Yeah, good.
You think you're up for the
task? I'll see if I'm up for it, yeah.
There's 3 myths that I am on a personal mission to dispel, but I know you've been working a lot in the same area as well. And I know you've worked with elite athletes and couch potatoes alike, and you've been able to get all kinds of people moving and benefiting from yoga. So I'm going to read you the 3 myths. You'll tell me if you're up for the job and then which one you want to do first. Okay, myth number one is that people do yoga mostly so they can get more flexible, or my personal favorite description, more stretchy. And that stretching is good for everyone. No matter how you come into yoga, how flexible you are, you could always benefit from being more flexible. So that's my myth number 1. My myth number 2 is that because yoga is just for getting more flexible, it's not really for strength training. It's just for getting stretchy, and you can't get stretchy and do strength training. So you got to go to the gym to do your strength training, which brings me to myth number 3, which is when you're in the gym and you're looking to get core strength, you want to do all that torso flexion that gets you those nice 6-pack abs, because having a 6-pack abs is a sign that you have a strong core. Those are my myths. First of all, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree that they're myths. I agree that they're myths.
All right. Can we go to work? Can we chip away?
Let's start chipping. If you'll read me the myth number 1 again.
Myth number 1 was about everybody coming to yoga because they want to be more flexible, even people who are already flexible, but that the main benefit of yoga is that you can touch your toes.
Yeah.
If you could touch your toes before.
Well, I will say that flexibility is certainly one of the benefits of most styles of yoga. As a physical therapist who's worked with, as you mentioned, a wide variety of people with a wide variety of injuries, I have a long-standing concern about people becoming over-flexible. And if your main practice that you're doing, whether it's yoga or just garden variety stretching, the main thing that you're doing is stretching and getting more and more flexible, you're creating a significant imbalance in your body between strength and flexibility. And the problem with that is that joints, if you really, really work on flexibility, which a lot of committed yoga practitioners do, you can actually create hypermobility of any joint in the body can become hypermobile. And of course, some common ones are the sacroiliac joints, knees, shoulders, parts of the spine can become hypermobile in one direction or another. I can tell you from 40 years of clinical experience that I have worked with a lot more people who have chronic pain problems, naggy pain problems. They're more likely to be hypermobile or overly flexible. The people who are stronger and tighter tend to have, I see them much less often for these naggy quality of life kind of pain problems. There isn't anything really wrong. There's no surgery that needs to be done. There's no big joint damage, but it's just naggy, grouchy, soft tissue. When I was in physical therapy school, granted it was many, many years ago, but we had to learn, every joint in the body has a normal range of motion that it's supposed to be able to move through. And so any joint in the body, you can name it and you can look it up. What is the normal range of motion? So we're going to have problems if a joint is significantly lacking in its normal range of motion, like if you've broken a bone and you had a cast on and they take the cast off and now you can't straighten your elbow or you can't raise your arm overhead. So you have a significant lack of the normal range of motion. It's going to get in the way of your activities that you want to pursue. On the other hand, if you have stretched, and there is a hereditary component for some people to become hypermobile, either the structure of the joint or the kind of connective and soft tissue they have, the joints move too much, that causes a lot of problems also. As I was mentioning, the hypermobile folks are much more likely to have naggy pain problems than somebody who is stiff and tight. So my goal, I've developed this idea as a PT, but it certainly strongly applies to yoga, is that each of us wants to have a balance between strength and flexibility. We have to have strength in the muscles that support the joint, and the joint also has to be flexible enough to move through its normal range of motion. So if we have set up our practice in such a way that the muscles are strong and they're also flexible, that's the goal. If you get a muscle that is very strong, but it's lost range of motion, it's gotten stiff and tight, that's going to create certain kinds of problems. But what we're talking about in this case is the person who has worked a lot on flexibility, but hasn't worked on the strength of the muscles to support the joint. And that can be
I ask you a follow-up on that?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I want to just before you get too far away, because you mentioned naggy pain, and a lot of times back pain, people think what they need to do is a forward bend. So those people who are hypermobile, as you say, which means their joints move too much and are less stable, they're thinking what I need to do for my backache is stretch in a forward direction, when in fact, what you're saying is the problem might be in the back. That they need to.
That's a really good example that you've just given, and it's one that I've heard so many times over the years, and a real commonplace is between the shoulder blades in the back. And so when somebody would come in for a PT appointment and I ask, what are we working on? What are you hoping to get from our time? They'll say, well, I have this, chronic aching between my blades in the back. And what I want from you, Julie, is to learn some stretches to stretch that out and relieve the tension and the aching. Meanwhile, they're sitting there horribly slumped over in their chair with their head forward and their shoulder blades forward. And what they are is weak in the muscles between the blades in the back, and they need to be strengthened, not stretched.
And they're already stretched out.
They're already overstretched.
Yeah.
And so then my job is to convince them that rather than giving them the stretches, they need to do strengthening exercises. And if I play my cards right and they trust me, then they'll try them, and it works really, really well to develop the strength back there.
And the other piece that you kind of touched on, and I am picking up on, is it's what I said before. There seems to be some merit or some assumed merit in forward bending. The further forward, if I could sit with my head between my knees, it's almost like if I could sit with my head between my knees in a straddle, I will get up and my dog will love me more, and I'll have more money in my 401k. Like something in my life will be better if only I could bend forward more.
Yeah.
But isn't that for a lot of people just making problems?
Yeah, and it's because people I'll just speak for our sedentary society, North America, much of Europe. People are sitting and they're working with their arms forward, whether they're using paper or a keyboard. So the arms are forward, their head's forward, their background's over. And so over time, they tend to get short in the front muscles. So we're talking about the pectorals, we're talking about the abdominals are short and tight, and the muscles in the back, so the other side of the coin, are weak and overstretched. And there are many, many problems that go along with that imbalance of being short in the front, and front of the neck is short. Many problems from being short in the front and weak and overstretched in the back. And to name just a few, so neck problems, neck pain, jaw problems, headaches, the pain in between the blades in the back, the compression around the diaphragm, and all of the internal organs, they're all being scrunched up here. And so it's a pretty simple equation that we want to open the front, stretch, so gentle supported back bends, and strengthen the muscles in the back. So I do have a bit of concern if somebody is doing a yoga practice where their main practice is forward bends. Because I think in a really traditional sense, if you look at the body of all of the poses that are available in asana practice, there's a lot of back bends. And I think we need to do both. We need to do both and not get fixated on doing just one category of poses. It needs to be well balanced. And in that same way, in a well balanced asana practice, there are strengthening for every muscle in your body. And we don't do it by lifting an external weight, like picking up a dumbbell or sitting in a machine where we're pushing. We do it by supporting the weight of our body parts against gravity. So, for example, I could go sit in a gym, in a machine, and push straight up. That's a military press, I believe. Or I could do downward dog, in which I'm bearing weight and I'm pushing in that same way, or a handstand. I could do, in the gym, I could do a bench press where I push out against the weight, or I could do plank pose. So I'm having to use pretty much the same muscles that you would use in a bench press when you do plank pose. So I'm pushing out. There's a whole bunch of muscles that get wonderfully strengthened. When you do standing poses, we work the heck out of your legs, and also a bunch of torso muscles. Some of the side of your body muscles, when you do triangle, for example, and you go over to the side, then side flank muscles over here have to contract to help hold up the weight of your torso, which is now angled to the side. So fantastic strengthening. There's a number of different systems of movement that talk about how you have a closed chain which is basically weight bearing instead of weight lifting in general, is really best quality for joints. And I have worked a lot with that in terms of shoulders, or shoulder rehab, rather than having people do weight lifting or even a lot of tubing exercises where you're pulling on the stretchy bands, that you do it with weight bearing. And that's the concave convex rule, which says that you get the best quality movement when you move the socket over the ball. And that's what weight bearing does on a ball and socket joint, like a hip or a shoulder. You're moving the socket over the ball. Instead of, if you're doing weight lifting, you're moving the ball within the socket. So that concave convex law is supportive of the idea of weight bearing, and that's what we do in the yoga poses.
So if I go back to what you said earlier, there's a strengthening move for every part of the body, depending on the energy and your approach and your choices and how you put them together, you can make a very strong yoga practice.
Yeah, and it has to do, for the most part, with your orientation of the body part to gravity. So it's something that a lot of people haven't thought about, which is how much the various parts of your body weigh. Like the heads weigh 10, 12, up to 14 or 15 pounds. A leg, just a leg by itself, weighs quite a bit. An arm, if you have to hold the arm up, that weighs quite a bit. Your torso, half of your body weight is from the waist up. So your torso, including your arms and head, is about half of your body weight. And so when you orient yourself to gravity, gravity is constantly pulling on these body parts, and we have to hold up against the pull of gravity, and that is strengthening. It's also putting weight on your bones. So for example, when you do plank pose, dog pose, handstand, you do vasisthasana, side plank, you're bearing weight on your arm bones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's bone strengthening work, right?
Bone, yeah. The theory is that when you put stress on a bone, which is a weight or force on a bone, that encourages your body to maintain the calcium density, the mineral density of the bone. And if you never put weight on it, if your body needs calcium, it's going to rob it from the bones that never get stressed. And I have seen a lot of women in the fall, sometimes they break their hip, but I've seen a lot of women who have fallen and they broke a shoulder, they broke their wrist, because those were bones that never, they didn't lift weights, they didn't bear weight on their arms. Yep. They did not bear weight on their arms like we do in yoga. So if the body needed calcium, it took it out of the arm bones, and they break when they fall.
The other thing, you mentioned the machines in the gym, and in the gym, first of all those machines were made for a 150-pound man, I believe. So you get on a machine and you're doing a movement that is not necessarily found in your everyday movement. You're doing out of sequence, out of context movements against an artificial weight. Whereas in yoga, when you're doing body weight resistance in a pose, you're actually working the whole body. There's not a way in yoga really to just
isolate one. Yeah.
Isolate, and we know isolating a muscle is a fallacy anyway. So that idea to work the whole long chain, the whole system in an integrated way against gravity is also a way to build strength with integrity in the system. And I know that's a huge piece for you, the alignment and
So here's maybe slightly different words than you're using, but I think it's optimal to train the body in patterns, because that's how we work functionally. If you're going to reach for a glass of water, it's not just it's not just your finger grippers that are going to pick it up, but you've had to reach, your wrist, your elbow, your shoulder, maybe even your back if you lean forward. So functionally, as we move through the world, we move in patterns. And so your brain doesn't have to stop and think, okay, I want to reach for that glass of water. Now, what do I have to do? It learns a pattern.
Mhm.
And if you're going to the gym and you're isolating, you put your elbow on the pad and you isolate your bicep as you pull up this way. Well, the bicep is going to get stronger, but it's not part of a functional, nicely aligned movement pattern.
Right.
And I believe we can use our yoga poses to develop these very healthy, beautifully aligned movement patterns that are going to affect how we walk up and down stairs, better alignment of the knee. They're going to affect how we, pick up the bag of groceries. They're going to affect how, the yoga off the mat, I call it, the practice of yoga off the mat, how we're living in our bodies. And so the kind of strength that we do, if you're mindful about how you're doing your poses, you're developing a whole pattern of strength that is very useful functionally. That's the ideal.
So you mentioned planks a few minutes ago, and I was delighted to read in the Military Times a couple years back that the Army has abandoned sit-ups. Number one, they cause a lot of injuries. And number two, they're not terribly effective. And guess what they put in their place? Planks.
I was hoping you were going to say planks. Yeah.
Yeah, planks, because plank is a superior way, and it's a nice segue to talk about the core. So
Yeah.
sit-ups is that torso flexion, which will get you a nice rectus abdominis, the six-pack muscle, whose job is to just torso flex.
Yeah.
So you want to tackle the core question.
Please.
At the core of it
Please.
all, please.
Please, can I talk about that?
Yes, please.
So one of my concerns about the typical ab strengthening that you get in a gym type or calisthenic type workout is that it is reproducing what is already a serious postural fault that we have, just an epidemic of it in our, I was going to say pandemic, but we have epidemic of this rounded, as we were mentioning earlier, flexed forward head, forward arms and shoulders. And that, so to go to do your exercise and do stuff that reproduces and reinforces what's already a problem alignment, to me, does not make sense. So yes, I believe we want to have strong abdominals, but I have made a science out of how can we work the abs without reinforcing this forward head problem that's already responsible for so much back pain, neck pain, jaw pain, headaches. So that's point number one. Plank is one of those poses, but there's a bunch of other ways that we can, if we're practicing mindfully and paying attention to what we're doing, that we can work the heck out of the abs. My other concern is that I consider core muscles to be a lot more than just the abdominals. So again, if we're thinking in terms of the balance in our structure, a good healthy balance, we need strength in the back as well as in the front. And I believe that my physical therapy volume of patients over the years would have been much reduced if only people did some back strengthening. Because backs get weak, as I said, in our sedentary society, they're weak and overstretched, and then you have to clean the garage, or you have to pick up a heavy bag of groceries, or your big cat or a dog or a grandchild, and your back muscles aren't strong, and so they get strained. Micro trauma or bigger trauma of the back muscles. And that would all be just eliminated if people did back strengthening. That would, all of those, what I call the garden variety, because it often happened when people were doing yard work, the garden variety back, micro trauma of the back muscles. So we need to have a balance. Yes, we need to be strong in the abs. We also need to be strong in the back. We need to be strong in this what I call the side flank muscles. And I like to expand people's perception of what core means to include the pelvis, because the pelvis is the foundation for your spine and your pelvis, your spine and your internal organs, your torso. So if your pelvis is misaligned, and you have significant weakness in some of the support muscles of your pelvis, then that's going to reflect right up the line into your back and your neck. So my idea of core is much bigger than the kind of the popular conception of what core means. And not only that, even though rectus abdominis, somebody that has the six pack, it's very fun to look at, I will admit. You see one of these football players with their shirt off and it looks really, really good. But it's actually the muscles that are deeper than rectus abdominis. So the obliques, the external oblique, internal oblique, transversus abdominis, those are the ones that are much more important in terms of supporting your low back, your pelvis, your SI joints, your internal organs. I occasionally have had a conversation with somebody whose belief is that you should not develop strong abs because one reason I heard was that it gets in the way of breathing if you strengthen your abs. And I just say it's like any other muscle in the body. We want it to be strong, but we don't want it to be hard and rigid. So if you just work it, and you never stretch it or lengthen it back out, then it might impede your breathing. But you have to do the back bends and the forward bends.
Awesome. Now, for someone who's looking to create such a program, I mentioned earlier that we've drawn you into creating lots of content for us, and you have a course coming up in the topic of, and I think it's more related maybe to how lack of core strength shows up as pain, as back pain. But I think anybody who's lacking core strength is also lacking good posture and good breathing, because core strength, if you don't have good posture, you're not breathing well anyway. So can you talk a little bit about the course? It's called, wait, I have the name right here. Yoga, Core Strength and Back Health, Keys to Pain-Free Living. And I think because you mentioned the upper back, the slouchy posture causes a lot of neck pain, jaw pain, headaches, all of that. And that's all related to core, isn't it?
Yes, although I will say the course that's upcoming is more of a focus on the low back, SI joints. There's a number of, I think, really important references about how to help keep your sacroiliac joints happier. It is a strengthening course, so I'm not talking about, how to modify stretching and things like that. It's really a focus on building strength. So it's the low back and the pelvis. Both, I make a reference to the kind of strained back muscles that are very common cause of low back pain. But the more serious problems, which are disc injuries that are also, if not caused by, at least implicated, the weak back and the flexed posture is implicated in a lot of disc problems. And also arthritis in the low back and the facet joints of the low back. And so I feel that everybody, regardless of your age, should have at least a little short routine that you do most days that is going to strengthen these important muscles. So I give people, a few very simple things that you do lying on your back to work the front that doesn't involve pulling your head forward and flexing. And then you roll over on your stomach, and there's a few things to strengthen the back muscles. So in less than 10 minutes, a few times a week, you can at least keep basic core, what in my definition of core, the front and the back. And it's like brushing your teeth. Do you want to keep your teeth, your natural teeth, for a lifetime? If so, you need to brush and hopefully floss. If you want to reduce the number of back injuries and the amount of back pain you have, it's a good idea a few times a week to spend a few minutes and strengthen these important support muscles to help stabilize. For those that are interested in going deeper, then we also went on to some more challenging poses that maybe are going to be less appropriate for people who are beginners, but there's plenty of stuff in there that's appropriate for beginners, either people newer to yoga or who are deconditioned. So they've lost strength. Sometimes it's because of an injury, they haven't been able to exercise, or it just hasn't been a priority in their life. They're raising a family and working. My intent was to give people tools. We start with things that are pretty easy and then add layers and levels of challenge depending on what kind of condition you are coming in.
And I think just to encourage people who are deconditioned, because I know your work that you do know how to work with people who are completely deconditioned, but because a lot of the muscles you're talking about get a lot of blood flow and they're big, it doesn't take that long to feel some result. And especially if you do it with consistency, that no one should be discouraged because they're in bad shape, because am I right?
Very good point. Yes. Yeah. That's kind of my specialty, and I don't always remember to say, but it is to start out with things that are very easy, very gentle, that pretty much everybody could do. And then give it some time. So you work on these easy things for a couple of weeks, and then you add the next level, and then a couple of weeks and you add the next level. And some advanced yoga poses that require a lot of yoga of abdominal strength. In my classes, we take months, if not years, to build up the strength and the competence to be able to do Urdhva Prasarita Padasana, for example, where you lie on your back and lower both legs together up and down. That takes a lot of strength, and it takes a long time to get ready to be able to do that, in my humble opinion.
Well, I think that's a really important point, because a lot of people, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot, I tried to do yoga, but I failed. I couldn't do it. And I'm always going to say the yoga failed you.
Yeah.
If you approach it correctly, you can do any pose after appropriate preparation and appropriate patience and time. But it doesn't matter if you're doing the pose. What you really want to do is get that inner core strength, which is a 360-degree.
Yeah, starting with the foundation down at the bottom, which is the pelvis and the alignment of the pelvis. And I'm sure you've heard me say, Lynn, that it breaks my heart when I hear somebody say, well, I tried yoga, but it didn't work for me. And so I went to one or two classes and I quit. And it can be because they got hurt, and they were trying to do too much too fast, and either, they didn't stop themselves, or the teacher didn't give them, the bite-sized pieces.
Yeah.
So sometimes they got hurt, but sometimes they got frustrated. They felt like they were stupid or a bad person in some way because they couldn't do. And so I'm kind of speaking to teachers right now. If you give people these bite-sized pieces and they have a little taste of success. So when somebody says to me, "Oh, I can do that," to me, I'm like, yes, because they're tasting the success. They're going to come back and say, well, what's next? What might I learn next? And hopefully they feel better after the session than they did when they came in. And so they're kind of interested. We haven't flattened their ego or made them feel stupid or incompetent. Give them a little support. I like to say I meet people where they are, and then
Exactly.
give them the pieces that are appropriate at that point in your life, and then go up from there. Yep.
Awesome. Well, Julie, thank you for helping me try to chip away
Yeah, chip away at the myths.
at the
Yeah.
myths, and also providing something as a counter to the myths, which is some really solid strength-based work coming up in this course. So I'm excited and looking forward to seeing you there for YogaUOnline. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you so much, Julie, for sharing your knowledge with us.
My pleasure. Hope to see people at the course.
Bye, everybody.